Is dark money one of the biggest threats to tackling climate change? If you're not super familiar with the term, dark money refers to funds given by an anonymous source funneled through different political action groups or nonprofit organizations. And the transaction of all these anonymous funds is getting in the way of passing comprehensive climate policy in Washington. Here's how it works.
A sound environment is the basis for the continuity and quality of human life and enterprise. Clearly, strong economies allow nations to fulfill the obligations of environmental stewardship.
Climate change is a hot-button issue, but believe it or not, at one point, addressing the problem had bipartisan support. George H.W. Bush vowed to address global warming internationally while in office, a stark contrast to Republican talking points today.
Because the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, and we can't just sit in the dark until Mother Nature lets us turn the lights back on.
What we should all be working for is an all-of-the-above energy strategy that will utilize more of our domestic resources to create jobs and meet America's energy needs.
When you look at the cost-benefit analysis being proposed, if you did all these things they're talking about, what impact would it really have on these changes that we're outlining?
So why has the issue of climate change become so increasingly partisan throughout the years, especially in the last decade? Well, a lot of this can be blamed on special interests and dark money. PACs are not required to reveal who donated to them. They can then go on to use those funds to finance campaigns and support individual candidates for office. Before 2010, there used to be a cap on how much a corporation could spend to influence Washington. But this all changed when a Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission upended century-old campaign finance restrictions and allowed corporations and other groups to spend unlimited amounts of money on elections. This ruling allows oil and gas companies to spend as much money as they want to influence policy. And since then, partisanship in Congress increased as corporations and special interests infiltrated Washington even more. Take Charles Koch, for example. He's the CEO of Koch Industries, one of the world's largest privately owned fossil fuel companies. In the 2016 presidential election, it is estimated that the Koch network spent around $750 million, close to the same amount of the money spent by the Republican Party. During the 2018 midterms, it was reported that Koch network spent more than $400 million to support conservative candidates and conservative ideals. With money comes influence, and through their spending, the Koch network did just that. They funded political advertising to downplay the risks of climate change and advocate for candidates who don't pass environmental regulations, but instead cut taxes and weaken environmental protections. As key players in the fossil fuel industry, this increases the Koch's likelihood to make more money and reduce the chances that meaningful regulations will pass. Now, if you think it's only billionaires involved, you're wrong. Lawmakers are involved too. You've probably heard a lot recently about this guy, Senator Joe Manchin. To refresh, he's a Democrat from West Virginia and almost single-handedly squashed the president and his own party's Build Back Better agenda. One of the main sticking points for him, the climate provisions aim to curb carbon emissions and penalize fossil fuel companies. Now, he's come under a lot of fire for taking money from PACs tied to the fossil fuel industry, and according to Open Secrets, Senator Manchin receives more funding from fossil fuel PACs than any other person in Congress, even more than Republicans. So how come more isn't being done to stop this? Democrats spent much of the last decade decrying Republicans' use of dark money, but as of late, they have begun to embrace it to fuel political and election funding. During the 2020 election, Open Secrets estimated that more than $1 billion of dark money was spent at the federal level. And this might come as a surprise, but overall, Democrats received more of these undisclosed campaign funds than Republicans. So it is hard to find politicians who will fight against a system that benefits them. To create meaningful change and reduce political corruption, many advocates call for a change to the current campaign finance system where there is little to no transparency. Democrats have introduced a bill to close the loopholes of dark money and require all donors spending more than $10,000 on campaign spending, including political ads, to disclose their identity. There's also been calls for the SEC to regulate and require companies to disclose their political donations, but so far, there's been pushback on both sides of the aisle, so much progress isn't being made. as the cost of campaigns increase each election cycle, it is expected that dark money contributions will increase as well. And if these contributions increase, it's not out of the question to assume it will be more challenging for meaningful climate policy to actually be passed. But without any dark money restrictions, the fossil fuel companies will always have a seat at the table to influence legislation. And in the end, we will have policies that increase the profits of fossil fuel manufacturers and none that actually protect us from warming temperatures, changing weather patterns, and rising sea levels. Now, it all might sound grim, but it seems like advocacy is our best bet.